Council will call the meeting order. For the record, it is June 24th, 2025 at 4:30 PM. We'll begin this afternoon's work session with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilwoman Little Roberts.
Here.
Councilman Taylor.
Here.
Councilman Overton.
Here.
Councilman Whitlock.
Here.
Councilwoman Strader.
Here.
Mayor Simonson.
Here. Next item up is adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
we adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is agreed to. First up is consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
we approve the consent agenda for the mayor to sign and the clerk to attest.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the consent agenda is agreed to. There are no items moved from the consent agenda, so we'll move on to Department Commission reports. First item up is item 22, fiscal year 2025 budget amendment in the amount of $550,075 for employee benefits plan trusts. And I will turn this over to Trust Member Neri, City Attorney Neri, or Bill.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you have the budget amendment in front of you. This was, as we had mentioned the last couple of presentations, this was to basically fill the gap of the current deficit that we've been experiencing in our reserve amount that's required for us to maintain for the Department of Insurance. Originally, we had proposed the possibility of a budget amendment that would include some anticipated cost. After further discussion, it was decided to simply just fill that gap now as we go through the rest of the fiscal year, as well as the rest of the calendar year through the plan. The numbers tend to fluctuate depending on usage. So we always monitor that, and if we need to have a conversation later or come back at a different point in the year, either the fiscal year or the calendar year for an adjustment, we'll come back and bring that information back to the council. Councilmember Cavanagh had asked some questions in anticipation of today. Anyway, we'd asked for the approval of the budget amendment. We had some particular questions that I could help answer, and I'll just go through them. Who's monitoring the trust balance and his staff, the trust, Gallagher, or BCI? So the trust balances are monitored by the trust. So the trustees and the HR staff monitor that. We do get also reports from Gallagher as to usage. Monthly, we do get reports from Blue Cross as to how the usage is. So we have some idea of what usage has occurred. They do give us notices. If there is a potential high claim that may come through. Often claims don't start off very high. I mean, as you can imagine, and with any type of medical condition, they sometimes tend to start, depending on what the condition is, they may grow over time. So some you can look at it and anticipate there may be some increased costs for certain types of conditions, but oftentimes you don't know that up front. But we do get, but it is monitored by the trust itself. Who's approving charges against the trust? I wasn't sure, Councilman Cavanagh. Who do you mean? Who's?
So, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
What
Bill,
charges are you talking about?
If Luke shows up at the doctor's office and they take my insurance,
Mhm.
so then that goes to Blue Cross.
Correct.
And then Blue Cross, I assume, then bills against the balance of the trust.
So they adjudicate the claim is
Okay.
what the terminology in the industry is. They determine that it's covered, it's a covered claim and how much of it's covered. And depending on the circumstances of the individual, whether it's covered as a claim against the deductible, have they met their deductible? Have they have they hit their stop loss in their deductible? Depending where it fits in their individual claim, then they will bill back the trust after the deductions are made. So for at least as far as I know, all of the carriers have deductions that are related to services, either for medications or for services that are provided for different covered doctors. You have within the plan, outside of the plan. So again, all of that stuff gets adjudicated through the carrier, so through Blue Cross, then it gets charged to the trust. So then that amount gets charged back to the trust. We get an accounting for all of that, so we know what those numbers are and those charges are, but they're charged once it occurs, right? So the individual doesn't experience that. I mean, they experience the services, and then of course, sometimes they get billed later, which is fairly common in a lot of this industry, where some get paid for their deductible up front, then they get billed later for the remaining charges once all that's done. So does that answer
Yeah,
your question?
Is that an automatic process or does the trust have to take an action?
No, trust does not have to take an action.
So it's an automatic process. then.
Yes. And then when's the deficit discovered? So what happens is over the accounting period, each quarter, of course, we get accounting. The trust has an accountant that keeps all of that tracked. And we also have to track for Department of Insurance. And then the folks here from HR are here as well if you have specific questions. So we then determine, as we report quarterly to the Department of Insurance, we report where our trust stands. So like, for example, after the first quarter, we recognized there was a deficit because of the higher usage. We reported that deficit. And what normally happens is Department of Insurance, at least historically, they don't normally come back after one quarter of a deficit because things get adjusted. Some of it takes time because adjustments don't all happen immediately. So there are adjustments that come through the regular process. There are rebates that come through additional process through the carrier. So sometimes it takes a while for that adjustment to finalize as to where it is and how much it is. So oftentimes what we've seen historically with the Department of Insurance is that we will notify them, hey, we've noticed this amount and we're aware of it. And we will then have a conversation at the trust level on how do we want to address it. And usually we'll wait 1 or 2 quarters to figure out how much is it really? Is it this number that we determined after 1 quarter? Is it a different number after the second quarter? And after all the adjustments have been made? And then what else are there ways to address it? For example, I remember if I reported to you one of the recent ones that we had some concerns about some of the drugs. And there was one drug that was available to change how the payment was being done for it. It took a while. It couldn't actually, we could implement it now. It would go into effect in October, but would help lower some of the cost for that particular drug. We agreed at the trustee level to go ahead and initiate that program. Blue Cross on their own initiated a way to help bring that forward a little faster than October. They could bring it forward in July. That would help lower some costs. We'd get some more rebate towards that and help bring some of the costs of that particular drug down. We only had, if I remember properly, I think we only had 1 or 2 employees on that particular drug, but every little bit helps. So it really depends. We look at all the methods. Is there other ways to address it before just simply asking for more funds? Is there a way to adjust the program, way to adjust any of the way it's being managed? Can we do anything different? And also, can we let it ride a little bit? Because again, it depends a lot of medical. And again, you have to remember when we're talking about the trust, it's not just medical, it's also dental and vision. But a lot of them are can very fluctuate by time of year, season, depending on what they are. So a lot of folks, for example, for maintenance types of things, people will go early in the year and do a lot of those things when they have their flexible spending accounts are replenished. And now they can go take care of a lot of maintenance things because they have those funds available to them. So they'll do that. And then they'll let it ride for a while, unless they have kids and things like that that have other issues, but they'll let it ride. But also once people have reached their deductible, it's very common, and we know this from the trust side, that towards the end of the year, if people have reached their deductible, they'd have to go get a lot of other things done because they've met their maximum out of pocket, and now they can get some other things done. So we try to look at those trends and try to figure out, is this going to adjust differently, down, up, where we're going to land? And if we get to a point where we decide from the trust standpoint we want to adjust that, we really don't wait for the Department of Insurance to tell us to do it. We usually look at it and go, we're going to anticipate that's probably where we're going to land. So let's try to be in front of it. Let's try to be more proactive as a trust. And instead of just waiting until the Department of Insurance says you need to fix it or address it, let's just address it. We think it's important. We want to stay in front of those things. So that's how we do that. So it's a long answer to your question, but that's kind of how we look at it.
So, Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cameron.
Bill, here's, I think, the part where some of these questions are coming from. This is where I need help or guidance from the trust. A year ago, when we were going into the budget, it was communicated to us, no increase to health insurance. Now, we understand now that was because you guys spent reserves to not have us go over. So there was an increase, but there wasn't an increase in the request from the
Correct.
And then, to learn, hey, we're going to come with a budget amendment, initially told for $550,000, which is before us tonight. And then for me to later then get an email for really $1.2 million. It makes it hard to understand kind of where we are in this process and how we as a council can predict what the expenses and increases are going to be, particularly under such significant budget constraints. So how can the council be best kept into the loop of what these changes are? And how can one council member being told in one meeting be consistent with what's going to be asked for the entirety of the council?
Well, I wish I had an easy answer for that. The reason for that difference that you saw was when you and I spoke about that, we were talking about the deficit, 100%. When we were crafting a budget amendment, it was the trust, and partly am I urging to say, rather than us coming back again at another point in time, where we're going to anticipate there's costs that are going to go against the trust, and we're seeing this trend, and in fact, Councilmember Whitlock provided me some information that we are not alone in this. This trend of increasing costs of medical is very much not just localized, but nationally. They're seeing it in every place. The state, for example, there's a recent article in the Statesman talking about the state of Idaho and their cost increase. But anyway, so what we were trying to do was be proactive and say, are we anticipating what are our costs going to be over the rest of this fiscal year or calendar year? Should we get in front of that? And in the narrative of that original budget amendment, we tried to capture some of that in that narrative in there as to where this number came from. And that it wasn't just, we thought it was 550 and now it's 1.2 million. No, the 550 was still the same. The additional potential was trying to get in front of where we see it. If we know we're spending approximately $94,000 a month for costs, and we anticipate without any other changes, knowing how much comes in from the premiums, that we're still going to have this gap, rather than coming back to you, and since we only have one chance for a budget amendment now, rather than coming back in October and saying, well, we have another deficit, or coming back in December, but afterwards it was decided, okay, let's not speculate.
Yeah.
Let's just take what's the known, which is the 550. Let's do that, and we'll come back later and report. Here's where we are. Here's the trends. Here's where it's occurred, up, down, wherever it lands, and this is where we are.
So, Mr. Mayor, one more if I may.
Councilman Cameron.
So, Bill, I hear you on that. And I think that the challenge is that the trust is informed of this, but that information isn't being relayed to the council until these budget amendments are coming. And so I guess that's where I'm looking to you as the chair of the trust to come up with a better plan to keep us informed. And whether that is quarterly updates, whether that is monthly financials, whether it is something that you and the trust and our finance department thinks is most appropriate. I don't like being surprised with these types of things. And I don't think there's anything malicious, but it's frustrating to essentially, to me, it has felt like the story has changed on this, depending on the questions that are being asked. And I know that's not anyone's intent, but that's just how it appears to me. And I want to eliminate that. And so I guess I'm looking for you as the chair to help give us some insight as to the best way to resolve that concern.
Honestly, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilman McGovern, whatever you'd like. All the trust meetings are open. They're all advertised. All the information is transparent. We certainly can transmit that to the council monthly, quarterly. We could do a presentation quarterly, biannually, whatever you'd prefer.
Okay.
Not a concern at all. I mean, we can certainly provide you that information. Understand, and again, in the wealth of information that we get without context, sometimes it may be a lot of information that really doesn't have a lot of substance for everybody. But again, we can provide you the information and then plan on a quarterly meeting so you know what's going to come in front of you or where it is trending up or down. That's not a problem. We can do that.
I'll chat, Mr. Mayor, I'll chat with the council Vice President Strader, maybe you and I can connect and come up with an action plan around that. Thank you, Bill.
And really, whatever you all want, again, they don't report to me either. In the context, so whatever you all want from the trust, I mean, it's a weird entity in that context. I can't compel them to do anything any more than you could compel them to do something, but I think they're more than willing to do whatever we want them to do. So that to me is the clear case of however you want the information, they will provide it. I have no doubt in that.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Schrader.
I really think like a pretty simple quarterly update with just some basic financial information about whether you're running at a surplus or a deficit compared to, you know, your projections, and key trends would be great. I think just keeping it simple, I take your point. I don't need to weed through detailed like claims information and stuff like that really wouldn't be appropriate. Like, I think we just need more communication is the answer, right? Like, I think we're gonna get to the right spot. I think just a great, like, simple quarterly update for everybody that kind of lets us know, okay, are we at a surplus or a deficit? And if we see 2 quarters in a row where we're running at a deficit, I think that'll be a heads up for all of us. Okay, we've got an issue. Now it's time to be proactive. Let's start having some discussions and conversations. I just think it's one of those things that it's really hard for us to get our arms around it when it's coming in front of us once a year. So I think if you come quarterly, that could be a great answer. And I'm happy to sit down with Council President Kavner and chat further if needed about like what some key metrics are. But I think just like keeping it simple, a quick check-in, I think that'd be great.
Yep, that's not a problem.
Thanks a lot.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Taylor.
Thanks, Bill. Just a quick question. I want to make sure I'm understanding it. The way the 550,000 for the budget amendment will be, it'll be spread across the different departments and functions of the city, and everyone will kind of pay their sort of their share. I'm looking at your memo here. We got council, the clerk, mayor's office, city hall, police department. Is that, and I see a reflective number, is that how each department will be paying a portion of the budget amendment, sort of allocated? Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, that you'd have to ask finance.
Okay.
It simply comes out of the fund balance. But I mean, it is allocated based on the membership. So
Okay.
the membership are divided up by employees. Oh,
No, perfect. Council, again, that is a percentage of how we see the budgeted distribution of funds. So it's our best estimate on where we believe the expenses will occur based on historical
Okay.
data. As Bill stated, the actuals will be the actuals. That's our best guess.
Okay.
Yep.
And maybe just one thing to add in, I know the question is about how do you predict, how do you get to it? I think the conversation I think the more conversation there is, the better, because ultimately, the council's best place to set expectations is on the front end, in terms of here's the amount of money that you're willing to fund the trust so they can build a plan to that amount. The trust doesn't have a great way to control the back end on when people spend more than is there. And that is just reacting to what the plan is that we've put in place. So if there's concerns on the amount that the trust is costing, and, as a general whole, I don't think 1 year is the best year to look at it, but I think that's, well, what are the plan design, or what's the financial amount that council is comfortable providing to the trust, and they will build the best plan they can with the money that's been provided. And then we can all just communicate, and when we see those trends, those expectations can happen, but it's really hard to know when healthcare costs hit and predict and not have an impact from that.
yes. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, with
Councilman Cover.
Mary's presentation, no additional questions. I move that we approve the fiscal year 2025 budget amendment, the amount of $550,075 for the Employee Benefit Plan Trust.
Second?
I have a motion and a second to approve item 22. Is there discussion on the motion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh.
Aye.
Little Roberts.
Aye.
Taylor.
Aye.
Overton.
Aye.
Strader.
Aye.
Whitlock.
All ayes, motion carries. The item is agreed to. Okay, next item up is item 23, which is Valley Regional Transit Fiscal Year 2026 Program Budget Requests. And it looks like it's not going to be Stephen that's going to come up to it, but invite Elaine up to the podium.
Is it this one or that one?
Either one.
Either one.
Either one, okay. Yeah, I'm usurping him again. Hopefully that's okay. Well, Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you for having me. I don't know if I'm quite as exciting as the Healthcare Trust, but hopefully I can keep you all interested. Really excited today to bring you some information about how the last year has gone. You know, we made a big service change last year, and when you make those kinds of big changes in transit systems, it can be kind of rocky, but in fact, it's gone pretty well. So excited about about what we have to show you. Whoops, what did I do? Doesn't seem to want to move forward. What did I do? Sorry. Okay. Don't touch the mouse. So today I'm going to talk about our recent accomplishments, some of the projects that we're working on, our funding request, which is always important, and then like to open a discussion that we don't have to answer today, but about maybe a process that would allow us to plan a little more longer term, give us maybe all a little more certainty and predictability. So recent accomplishments, we, as you know, did a big service change in 2024. Services in Meridian changed a bit. What we did was take the Route 45, move it off Fairview and move it onto Pine, and then take the Route 30 and make it every other with the Route 45. We also instituted a new route that, two new routes, one from Town Square Mall in Boise that hits the village, and the Route 42, which used to just be a peak hour commute route, is now every hour, all day, and it runs through the southern part of Meridian on Overland. Those changes have been successful overall. I'll talk about some of the bits and pieces and why it looks the way it does. We also, in 2024, implemented Beyond Access, which is a consolidated service of senior centers and Harvest Transit and various things. The City of Meridian Senior Center did not join that. It may be a conversation later on, but Harvest Transit did. And overall, it's been a very successful change. We also held the first annual Community Transit Association of Idaho Transit Day at the Capitol to begin raising the profile, I guess, if you will, of transit around the state and begin talking about the economic impact of transit, which is pretty high. So the Meridian Network, I thought we had a different slide here. Okay. Meridian Network is, as I mentioned, relatively simple. We've got the Route 42 on the southern end. We've got both the Route 45 and the 30 through the middle, and then that new one that comes from the Town Square Mall and hits the village. Ridership on these is varied, and I want to talk you through what the differences are. So the Route 24 didn't exist before. It now has 16,000 riders. 2,500 of those originate in Meridian, but you should know that those riders are ones that are, contributing to your economy, even if they don't originate here. The Route 30 actually got service cut in about half. That service was added to the Route 45. So the fact that it's down 18.3% is, if you think about, the service hours it has now compared to the service hours it had before, actually higher rather than lower, even though that seems counterintuitive. The Route 40 is still a peak hour route. You can see it's also up quite a bit. The Route 42 is up a fair amount, including up in Meridian. The Route 45 is up a lot, but the ridership in Meridian is not up as much as we'd like to see. In fact, it's down a little bit. We think it's the change from Fairview to Pine and not finding the riders yet on Pine, but losing some on Fairview. So that's a route that we'd like to investigate and see if we can make better. I think the important thing is that overall, there is an increase in ridership, even though we're showing a lower ridership on the 30. Overall, if you look, accounting for those changes in hours on the 30, we think we're in very good shape. And if you look at our forecast, so here's the other interesting thing when you make these kinds of changes. Typically, you see a reduction in ridership the first year. And in fact, we've seen an increase in ridership overall, and we're projecting an even bigger increase next year. So like we say, overall ridership's up, transit activity in Meridian is up if you take all of the routes, and we'd like to explore alternatives for the 30 and 45 and see what we can do to make those better. Beyond Access is the service I talked about that consolidated a lot of the senior centers. So previously we had 5 different zones and 12 different providers. We had 12 different phone numbers. We were paying administration for 12 different services. It was not a very efficient way to provide these rides. And if I'm a senior and I'm in Meridian and I want to go to Boise, I can't go to Boise because my zone doesn't include Boise, or if I want to go to Nampa. So now they're all one zone. The purple area is all one zone. We're moving people in between all of those. And again, with change, it's hard at the beginning, but we're now seeing an increase in ridership. In fact, to the point where we're almost at capacity. So we're going to have to talk about capacity at some point on this service, but it's, from our perspective, been a really good success. It's lowered those administrative costs and put those into more rides available. So it was launched in 2024. Ridership in those first 9 months was 8780. Here's the big thing that should be of interest to Meridian. Because you're in the middle of the region, I think, 41.3% of all trips on Beyond Access are serving Meridian. You guys are getting a big bang for your buck there. Your percent of the population is only 17.4% of the whole region and 25% of the county. So I think for Meridian, this has been a great success. Rides to Wellness is another one that you contribute to. And again, ridership on it is up tremendously. We're looking at ways to move some of those rides to cheaper rides. And Beyond Access, for instance, and Fixed Route are both ways that we could move those people more efficiently. So we're looking at strategies to commingle those services and see if we can use that money more efficiently. But regardless, the money to date this year has gone very far. The Veteran Shuttle is not a lot of rides, but for those vets, it's a really important ride. And again, that one's up as well. You all do contribute to these specialized services, and it's a big part of their success. So thank you for that. And yes, we are asking for that contribution again. So current projects, Beyond Access, we'd like to expand it, not just to Rides to Wellness, but we're looking at commingling it with rides to the general public. So right now, there's not any on-demand rides in Meridian for the general public, only for older adults and persons with disabilities. We've been talking to FTA about the efficacy of doing that in terms of how our funding comes in, and they believe that I actually went to a conference and saw some systems that are doing that, and is working quite well. So we're working right now with our data provider to create a database that could commingle those rides. And we'd like to work with your staff to make sure as we do that, that we figure out a way to do it that can help riders in Meridian who currently don't have access because of the limited span geographically of the service that you do have, all east-west and no north-south. We also have a ride called VRT Lift Pass to high ridership stops. And we've expanded that with the service change. In doing that, we saw a tremendous increase in rides in the places we were able to expand it. And we'd like to talk to you about the possibility of expanding it into Meridian. So again, we could reach some of those riders that today don't have access. And then we're working on Valley Connect 3.0. Your staff has been participating, and we're looking in that plan over the long term of planning to expand service north-south between Meridian and Eagle, and potentially in longer term between Meridian and Cuna. So again, just like to make sure to continue to work on those. So here's the VRT Lift Pass program. The zone on the right, what color does it show up for you? Pink zone is where it is today. And as I noted, we're seeing a big increase in people using that. We'd like to explore expanding it across Meridian so that people in Meridian could have access to either stops at CWI, stops at the Village, stops on Overland, that would then get them onto the fixed route so that they could go farther. All of these, you know, as I'm talking about this, it's not that we're going to necessarily ask you for more money. We'd like to have a conversation about what it would cost to do these things, what efficiencies we could find, ways to save money, and in the end, is there something that we could do that would expand access to your riders that would be reasonable for all of us? So just wanted to talk about the possibilities because we see some real big ones, frankly, in Meridian. This is the Valley Connect 3.0 network in the draft plan that we've got. And you can see if we're able to institute this, there'd be a tremendous increase in in access to rides in the north-south area in Meridian. Right now, those don't exist much. And we know as we look at the data that there's a lot of demand for it. That network would also provide your riders with good access into Boise. You can see the red line on there is the rail corridor. And remind me, Stephen, does the Jane map include rides on the rail corridor or not? I don't think it does it? It does, okay. If and when we get, I should say when, because I'm confident we're going to get it, when we get the rail corridor, folks in this part of Meridian are going to have much better access across the region. So we talked to some of you early and to the mayor early. We got a request to keep our request at the same amount as we did last year. We are, in fact, just at that. We still are asking for those, the support for those special services. You saw the impact of those on your population. And the fixed route, as it's been changed during change day, we're really confident and excited about the growth in ridership that we're seeing there. So before I go on to this, maybe any questions about where we are and what we're planning?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Taylor.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions on the lift pass. I think that's a great idea and I'm glad to hear it seems like it's been working. Do you have some data on like who are the users of the lift pass? Are these, is there a certain, I mean, it's not those who are like those getting rides to maybe hospitals, but maybe it is. Do you have some data on who are the typical users?
And Stephen maybe has more data on that. And you're welcome to come up, Stephen. As we look at the riders of the Lift Pass, they're typically people who would use fixed route if it were available, but it's not. Many of them today are using a Lyft or an Uber that costs $20 or more dollars. We're able to make the Lift Pass available for $2 if they only go to that nearest transit stop. And it provides them a much cheaper way to get onto transit and complete their ride.
Yeah, we don't market the lift pass differently than to the general public, and it doesn't require any kind of eligibility. So we don't have specific demographics on who uses the lift, but in terms of what they're using it for, how it differs from say a Rides to Wellness type of trip is that it's designed to get people to the closest bus stop. So we're seeing people who maybe live a little farther away from transit, use it to get to a stop and then continue on their ride. And so it could be ideal for something like the stop on Overland at Lowe's, where we have a lot of people getting on the 40 or 42, or at 10 Mile, or at the Village.
Mr. Mayor, a quick follow-up.
Councilman Taylor.
Then what is, and maybe you'll get into this a little bit later, but expanding that service into Meridian, is that because we need to subsidize the, essentially paying for part of that lift pass?
Yeah, right now we have actual private foundation grant that we've been using to subsidize that. We're looking for another one. We haven't yet identified one that we've been awarded. But we do, the way that pass works is we ask the rider to pay $2. We'll pay $6. If the ride is over $8, they pay the difference beyond that. And so we know it's a fixed subsidy. And so, yes, what we'd want to do is identify what we think the ridership would be if we expanded the zone to include Meridian, and then identify what we think the cost of that would be, and either go after another private sector foundation grant or work with you on another funding opportunity.
So the Lyft driver, it doesn't look any different. They just pick the person up and know my drop off is here, but the rider actually says, okay, to get this discounted ride, I'm going to go to this closest stop. Okay, thank you.
Yep, yeah, you still use the Lyft app. It just is through the BRT piece of it.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Strader.
I just had a couple questions before you move on. So it looked like there were about 74,000 rides. What percentage of those originate in Meridian? I kind of just wanted to go through the numbers again.
Let's go back to that. We're getting there, sorry. Again, Stephen can help me with this. So when we talk about boardings in Meridian only, of those 74,000 in the 24, 25, 9 months, 15,000 of those.
Okay. And then, you know, and I hate to put you on the spot like this, but I understand setting up Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind,
Councilman Strader.
setting up a public transit program is challenging. It takes a while, investments, you have to get adoption, you need frequency. But at what point is it appropriate for us to start looking at just cost per ride? Because if I look at cost per ride in Meridian, I'm kind of scratching my head. I've been a supporter of public transit. I think it's important for us to invest in. It's much more efficient, but there are changes in technology coming with automation, robo-taxis. We have a lot of disruption, I think, just generally coming to our economy through artificial intelligence. How are you guys thinking about those things? And then just from a general perspective, at what point do we sort of hone in on more of a cost per ride? Like, when are we mature enough to start looking at that? Because if I look at cost per ride, it's huge. And I'm struggling with that because, as you know, I appreciate you holding funding requests flat. We're in a really horribly challenging budget perspective on our operating costs, not on our capital costs, not on our impact fees. Things like that are fine, but our operating costs are super tough right now. So I kind of just wanted to talk through those things.
Sure. So we're at a place with this transit system where in the places we can provide the kind of frequencies that we know really attract people, our cost per ride is going down tremendously and the performance is going up. In the places where that frequency is not as high, the cost per ride is still pretty high. So it's a chicken and egg thing. If you cut service, that cost per ride for whatever's left is actually going to go up. It's not going to go down. if we can figure out ways to provide more service, then the cost per ride is going to go down. So all of those things I talked about on the future of, here's ways that we can get more out of the money we're spending already are designed to do just that. There's also the opportunity, we've identified some opportunities with some of the federal funding around the carbon reduction program and some other things that we think hold some real promise in providing us a little bit lower cost per ride subsidy. We've also are working hard with some private sector investment in that will end up providing earnings to us, and cost reductions. And we plan to share all of those with our partners when we get there. But the challenge is that right now it's pretty expensive to run. And if we cut it, it's going to be more expensive to run, and it will be harder to do those things I just talked about to make it more efficient. So I'll be honest with you, I'm asking partners this year to stick with us, give us a chance to make this work. We think we can. We're trying to lean into those disruptions in technology. That conference I talked about was all about saying, how do you take a fixed route system, an on-demand system, and a VRT lift system and make them all one so that you get the most out of that in one system instead of paying for each of them separately. And we think that there are efficiencies there and cost savings there. We're looking at cost savings on renewed natural gas that will also bring us some rebates and so lots of other things we're trying really hard to identify. I know the budgets are tough. I've sat on your side of the dais, and it is a really, really tough time. And so I know it's asking a lot to say, stick with us through this if you can, because we're really working hard to be on the cusp of making this better, and we think we can. But if we go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, it can make it a lot harder.
Mr. Mayor,
That's what share.
just maybe a couple more. What, I get what you're saying. What's your time frame of when you think you will reach that destination? Like how, and maybe it would help. I'm more financially oriented, so I tend to think about things in financial metrics. If there's a different metric, I'm happy to hear. Like, what's a great cost per ride that you have now, maybe in a more mature part of the system, like in Boise? I'd be really curious, like, what's your best cost per ride area? Like, what could we get to one day? I'd be curious about that. And then, yeah, just talk about time frame and how long we should expect to sort of stick with this and keep trying. Because if, and in fairness, the special services really are a little different, right? So I'm kind of, but if I take like around $880,000, if I back out the special services, if I just divide that by, I think, riders originating in Meridian, I'm getting to a cost per ride in the $30 plus range. That just feels really high to me. So I just want to like have some context for that and understand if the request is please stick with us, like how long would that be before we, we'll see improvement?
A couple quick comments on that. When you're talking about the current boarding, the trips in Meridian were just for the 9 months. So that 15,000, you would factor that up to a full year. So you're talking about 20,000-ish. And then within most of those trips are actually going outside of Meridian. So a lot of those trips on the 40 and the 45, they're getting on in Meridian and they're going either to Boise or to Nampa. So when you talk about boardings, which is what you're looking at, you're seeing one half of those trips. So if you're talking about which is one of the problems when you're talking about trying to look at just the impact of a single jurisdiction when you've got service that connects multiple jurisdictions. So let's say you've got 20,000 boardings in Meridian, they go external. You got 20,000 boardings in Boise that are coming to Meridian. So all of those trips are of use to Meridian residents. And so now you're talking about instead of $30 a ride, it's maybe closer to $15 a ride on getting both the trip out of Meridian and the trip back to Meridian, right? And when we talk about boarding, to your second question, when you talk about boardings, cost per boarding in a more mature market, in Boise, Well, actually, system-wide, our cost per boarding is about $11-ish per boarding. And so at 15, we're getting close-ish to, you're still quite a ways from the average and you're pulling that up, but that's where we're at. So something about $10 or less per boarding is a good number for our region.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Strayer.
I guess I just have one request after this meeting, which is if you all wouldn't mind, take your time, but if you could follow up with me on your math on that, and so we can get synced up there, because I'm not sure I'm totally tracking with you. I'd like to drill down into that a bit more. I have to have some context for in a really tight year with competing priorities. What are the metrics? And if the request is stick with us, I think a little bit more on the how long and kind of what are the milestones that we're trying to see along the way, so I could say, okay, maybe this cost per ride is not what I want, but I can stomach it because these are the milestones I'm going to be seeing, and then I can measure and track where we're at on those milestones. So that's just coming from me, but that would really help me. Thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And by the way, I want to point out that there's a mistake in this. That 17.1 should be green. It shouldn't be red. That's an increase in ridership in Meridian. I don't know how that happened. I just realized it last time we went through. I think maybe I can get at your other question. If there are others, I can take those first with this conversation about the
I think there are a
long
couple
term.
more that are, I have some that are related just to this very topic, but I'll go to Councilman Overton.
So a little different perspective.
Okay,
When you go back to that slide that had the numbers,
sure. Will do. There we go.
and I'm going to look at this from a totally different perspective, not money, but vehicle trips through our city. Because we're constantly looking for ways that we can reduce vehicle trips through our city. And if I understand this correctly, that 15,000 over 12 months would be 20,000 vehicle trips annually not happening in our city, that are originating in our city. But further than that, if we have 41% of all the ridership coming through our city, then 41% of 12 months of your total boardings by route is a much bigger number of people that we're not having driving through our city that are taking Valley Regional Transit. And I think it's hard for us sometimes to quantify a dollar amount on what that's worth to reduce that traffic on our roadways.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point. We often look at transit as a subsidy because what you pay for with transit is the operating. What you pay for with roadways is the capital, and then people use that facility that you've just provided for them with their own capital to operate and use it. But that comes with a cost, both to the public and then on the maintenance of that capital project that you just built. And so the other interesting thing that I've been thinking a lot about, we often say, well, roadway use is a user fee because we have gas tax, and that's true at the state level or the federal level. But as you know, at the local level, most of the local roadways come through property tax. They don't come from a user fee. And so, in fact, there's also a really pretty significant subsidy, especially at the local level, on our roadway system. I don't know how you make that comparison. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. If anybody's smart enough to, I'd love to hear it. But I do think, the point is transit is really the only way, proven way to reduce congestion. You can build more roads all you want, but typically what happens when you build more roads is you get more trips. And when you build more transit, you also get more trips, and that means less trips on the road. So, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just a quick follow-up. I've done the math.
Councilman Overton.
So if we take the 73,934 boardings by route, that's 9 months of data, move it to 12 months, and then only count 41% of that would be what we consider traveling through our city. That's over 40,000 vehicle trips per day not going through our city in personal vehicles.
Not a day. Not a day. Yeah, because I think we all look at numbers and try to understand them, what it means. Because I look at it and say, boardings in Meridian only, that could be the same 100 people if, for the entire year using this facility, if they were doing it every single day to and from work today. So And I know that you have some data that tells you how many are repeat riders and, versus
Unique riders,
unique riders, and some of that has some definite, I think, important information as well that could be shared. But the boarding, that's kind of where I was going, just looking at the boardings in Meridian only. Any idea, any data on those that are unique versus, are we talking about 100 people boarding in Meridian for the year? Are we talking about 5,000 people boarding in Meridian with 3 of them doing it?
We do have some ways at getting at that, depending on if they use the app to pay or not use the app to pay. And I can certainly dig into it. I don't have it.
I think that'd be some other good information, just to get some idea about how many people
Yeah.
are using it from that
Might be
standpoint.
a projection based on what numbers we do have, but we could come up with something, certainly.
Okay.
And I would be happy to follow up Council Member Strader and really dig into those numbers. So longer term, here's what I've been thinking. So when I was a city council member at the City of Boise, I recognize this every year we come, we have that, we don't know how much it's going to be, we don't know what it's for. And I help the city and VRT work out a longer term memorandum of understanding that sort of set a floor. And it was a growing floor because in their case, it's based on a percentage. You have an example with your Arts Commission where it's based on a per population basis. And what it means is that you can align your current service, maintenance, and expansion plans on an agreed upon expectation. And it doesn't mean that you're tied to paying us that amount. Obviously, there's the non-appropriation clause in the Idaho Constitution. Neither one of us wants to violate that. And so the agreement also identifies how to make changes in it. But it does it in a way that provides some public input, provides us the ability to give you input and you the ability to ask us questions so that we don't face what we've faced with some of our other partners, which is in the middle of a budget workshop and we've got to find $200,000 somewhere. And gosh, it looks like we could just pull it from here and that will work. And nobody really has any understanding of the impact of that. And so by doing this in a longer term agreement, we can identify that process, which makes it more predictable for all of us, including your public. And then it also would outline communications. So on a regular basis, we provide certain communications with the City of Boise based on this. And so we could, individualize those for Meridian. What are the things you're interested in hearing from us on a more regular basis? We just heard that every quarter you'd like to hear an update from the Healthcare Trust. Maybe they're, similar to that. What could we do to help? And so it helps those surprises in the middle of the budget season. For us, remember that we're subject to 15 annual budgets and 15 annual budget processes. And so if there's a change in July, there's not much we can do about it except be surprised and figure out what service we can cut or what corners we can cut. So it helps with that. It helps you and us both understand what the upcoming capital needs are and expectations, gives us an opportunity to perhaps smooth them. I'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide. Perhaps in a strategy to address growth, if you use a population basis or a percentage, this communication process, and it allows both our staffs to have a little more certainty in the advanced planning for the budget, rather than waiting for, well, what is it you're going to ask for this year? And if 6 months in advance that that's going to be a problem, we can start those conversations then, if that makes sense. On the capital side, you mentioned that capital isn't as big a problem, and sometimes it isn't. So maybe it makes more sense not to include capital in the agreement, but to include an agreement that here's the expected capital costs over the next number of years, and you understand those and are willing to step up to those. Or maybe you'd rather have it not be lumpy, because capital costs are. Sometimes you buy a lot of buses, sometimes you do a facility maintenance, big project. Sometimes, this or that happens. We have a 5-year plan, just like most do, and so we know what most of those are coming out, and it's not smooth. It's like this. So we can either smooth that out or not smooth that out if we have an agreement. I think it allows both of us to plan maybe a little more predictably what that might be. So that's what I have today. I know it's a tough budget year. To your question about what do you think, how many years would this be? You can see the color of my hair. I've made a commitment to be here for the next 5 years. Beyond that, I don't think I'm going to be here. So my goal is to have all of this done well before I'm done. And I'm working hard to make sure that we can get some predictability in this process and build the ridership that we know that this region really needs to solve some of the congestion problems we're facing. And that I think the people in this region are hungry for, as I'm hearing them talk about it. So hope that makes sense to you. We are making the request for the same amount this year as we had last year. We do see growing ridership. We promised 20% increase in ridership with the service change. You guys are at 17.1% in the first year, and we said that would be year 2. So we're actually pretty excited that you're ahead of the curve in terms of ridership growth based on the changes that we made. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any additional questions, comments?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilwoman Little Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Elaine. I just want to say thank you for your perseverance. You've had a vision as long as I've known you and have just figured out different ways to work toward something this valley needs. The look has changed over time. I'm seeing more riders on the benches near me. I'm seeing the on-demand vehicles out and about. And to me, that's a good sign that it is being used and you are making progress. So keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Yeah, Elaine, I echo Councilmember Little Roberts' comments. I think you and your team have done a pretty admirable job. I was reviewing your presentation from last year and had come prepared with some questions, and your presentation addressed most of them. The ones that I am kind of curious about, and it speaks a little bit to Councilmember Strader's questions. What are you and your team doing to look at automating your fleet? I think that we are 2 or 3 years away from that tipping point of shifting away from driver-assisted transportation to driverless transportation. And to me, I see that as, again, also a tipping point in the affordability of making, again, we just discussed the cost of health insurance. We want to make sure that we're paying all of our employees a fair and equitable wage. I know you want to do the same for your team, and that certainly comes at a price. So what are kind of you and your team doing to kind of be forward-looking, and what is the future of transit in the Treasure Valley? Does it include drivers, or do we shift to an automated service?
That's a big question. I wish I had enough money to answer it. I probably don't. My reaction to that is transit will include autonomous features, and they'll be growing probably relatively quickly to the level 4-ish autonomy in the next 3 to 5 years. The city of Austin just completed a pilot where their electric buses all come into the yard, the driver gets out, the bus goes and fuels, the bus goes and parks, the bus comes in the morning and starts and is ready for the driver all by itself. Because in the yard, you can do the optical reader path that the bus follows. There's no other traffic. It's really easy to do that. They think they're going to save, in their case, they have a much bigger system than us, millions of dollars a year in operator costs, wages, because those operators have almost an hour a day on both ends where they're not required to do all the moving around of the bus. So I certainly see those kinds of things relatively quickly. On bus rapid transit routes or higher capacity routes, I think there's a real possibility, depending on what kind of roadway infrastructure we have on those routes, to also have those optical reader paths that the bus will likely mostly follow. You'll still need a driver on board, I believe. The other thing about, as I look at public transportation, the driver provides much more than just driving the bus. They greet the passenger. If something happens in the bus, they take care of that. And so I think you're still going to need that person on board. And it's the ability to move a lot of people together that makes for the efficiency of buses. So, you know, as we get to that, more people on the bus together, you get more efficient, but it also means you have greater need to make sure that there's a body on board who can take care of problems that might happen. And they're not safety problems typically, especially in our region. There's a perception that buses are not very safe, even in regions where there are some safety issues on buses, personal safety issues. Bus travel is still much, much safer than car travel. We kill less than 100 people a year, and cars kill 40,000 people a year, right? So, I mean, I hate to use those words, but if that's the way you're going to look at it, buses are very, very safe. But the security of having that person on board to take care of problems if they arise is, I think, going to continue to be a big thing, regardless of the propulsion and the guiding of the bus, if that makes some sense. So yes, we're leaning into that. I think in the yard is going to be the place we'll use it first. And I think there's some real possibilities of some savings there. We're already talking about some savings in our Caldwell facility, not autonomous at this point of how to fuel those buses. Right now, it's not a very efficient process, and we're talking about a process that we think is going to cut an hour and a half every 2 days out of staff wages to get those buses fueled. So yes, technology is going to help us all along the way. I don't see fully autonomous on any rubber-wheeled vehicle, including individual cars. I think the level 4 is going to be adopted pretty quickly, but I think we're still a ways away from fully autonomous. Thanks. From everything I've read.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Taylor.
Blaine, thank you. I think one thing I'm really interested in is how do you immediately start using the ability of the ride sharing. That's a great value for people who might want to use it. I do think, you know, instead of envisioning a public transportation system that looked like it did 20 years ago, what is it going to look like tomorrow, 5 and 10 years? And the autonomous stuff will come along at some point. I don't know when, but in the near term, I think the ability to focus resources on those high traffic areas, and really appreciate Councilman Overton's comments, even though I usually doubt his math, but he's a cop and it's cars, so he is probably right. But I think I appreciate you as an organization trying to look more into and expanding on the idea of using ride sharing. I think I would be very supportive of that. I think that's something that having some consistent routes and some regular bus traffic and getting people to those is very helpful instead of trying to create this intricate, you know, complicated bus route system, try to figure out what the riders are. So I very much appreciate that. I think, you know, my request would be, one, I would appreciate what Councilman Strader asked for in terms of the information. I would like that. Probably all of council would. But it encourage you guys to continue to be very aggressive in thinking about how to utilize ride sharing to get people to your routes. And I'm open to that conversation in terms of how that could look potentially in Meridian.
Great to hear. Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me follow the Healthcare Trust. And we'll hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Lane. Appreciate it. Okay. Next item up is Mr. Stewart on item 24, which is potential public-private partnership for sewer line installation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Wait here just a moment for this presentation to come up. It's pretty short, so. While that's coming up, I can do sort of the intro. So as the mayor said, I'm here to talk to you today about a new concept for the city of Meridian. We haven't really engaged in this type of an agreement before. But as The agenda indicates, I'm just going to talk about this idea conceptually, what it entails. We're going to talk about the project that's kind of driving this discussion, but very lightly because you guys will be hearing about that project on July 8th. So I'm not going to go into any details about the project per se, but I want to make sure that part of the reason we came tonight is to give you guys the heads up and basically give you some information, because they'll likely refer to this discussion that we've been having with them around a public-private partnership in that hearing. And we wanted to make sure that you weren't caught off guard by that. We're going to talk about the important conditions that as a staff, that being Public Works, legal, purchasing, we have sort of incorporated into a draft agreement, as well as the developer himself. Going to talk about the timing of the project and the agreement, and also potentially how this might be used in the future, limitations, so forth. So the conceptual idea here is really for the developer and the city to collaborate to advance infrastructure projects from a timing perspective in a manner that would save essentially money for both the city and the developer if we were to do these projects on our own. So to begin with, the developer came to us, talked about the concept of a public-private agreement. We weren't familiar with them, so we ended up asking for some examples of public-private agreements elsewhere. We reviewed those documents. We got about 5 different public-private agreements, reviewed those for terms, conditions, one thing and another. Some of those were with the city of Boise. They've engaged in these types of agreements before, including with this particular developer that we're going to talk about. So we did that review. We then met as a staff and talked about what conditions are important to us that we would have to have in this type of an agreement. And then with the idea that a good agreement had to provide some win-win for both the city and also for development. And with the understanding that city council would obviously have the final say on whether they would enter into an agreement and what the terms and conditions of that agreement would look like. So the project that's going to be driving this discussion around this public-private agreement is a Toll Brothers project. It's called Dayspring. It's located just southeast of the intersection of Eustic and McDermott Road. It's on the agenda, as I mentioned, for July 8th. This particular project doesn't have any access to sewer without a significant off-site sewer extension, which is the nexus for the public-private agreement. The city has in our current CFP to build a segment of this off-site sewer in 2028. It's the McDermott trunk sewer that comes south down McDermott Road. It's currently located about a half a mile north of the intersection of Eustic and the old McDermott alignment. Our intention in 2028 is to extend that down to the intersection with Eustic. The developer, whoever they are, would then be required to extend that line to the east down Eustic Road. And that hasn't changed, and that's actually not part of the agreement. The line that's going down Eustic Road is not a part of the public-private agreement. It's only that segment that the city had intended to build in 2028. I think that's important for everybody to know. The public-private agreement would, if we decided to do it, would essentially advance that project by 2 years. So it would pull it up into 2026. So here's basically the meat of the discussion. I do want to give some background and talk a little bit about historic practice. So typically the city does not engage in building sewer, water line extensions, except in rare cases where those are significant pieces of infrastructure which would be nearly impossible for any development to absorb the cost and be profitable. These are for major projects for the most part. And that's the McDermott trunk. It's a 30-inch diameter trunk line over 30 feet deep. When we go down that road, we're wiping out the entire McDermott Road and rebuilding it. It's a huge project, very expensive and very difficult. And so there's not a developer out there that can acquire enough land to ever do that by themselves and make that work. So the city's gonna, had planned to do this work. So typically we wouldn't do this for any other type of project. So that's just, want to make that clear. We don't often do these types of things. So in thinking about what those conditions were going to be, one of the first conditions that we talked to the developer about was that this project, to be considered for a public-private partnership, would have to be in the 5-year CFP. The reason for that is that anything beyond the 5-year timeframe is too speculative. We don't know if it's actually going to happen or not. So it has to be in the 5-year CFP. Another one, it would have to be bid out according to public bidding rules. So developer would have to follow public bidding rules because eventually public money would be spent on it. The price for the work would be split 50-50. This is the advantage for the city. We have the ability to potentially get this project done for half of what it would cost us to do it if we did it by ourselves. And conversely, it's half the cost for a developer to do it if he had to do it by himself. Change orders were another issue that we wanted to talk about. The concept is that we would split any change orders on a project 50-50 up to a maximum for the city of 5%. The rationale behind that is the rule of thumb in the industry is that if you have a well-designed project and a good bidding process, that overall change orders on a project should be able to be managed below 10%. We average about 5% on the projects we do as a city. We wanted to cap that so that we could ensure that if the developer didn't put together good plans and didn't bid it well, and the change orders went over 10%, that he'd be responsible for that, and the city wouldn't be responsible for anything more than 5%. So we capped that as well. The other thing that's really important for us is that the developer would actually front the entire cost of doing the project. In this case, he would front the entire cost of doing the project in 2026. The city wouldn't give our contribution, our 50% contribution would not be due until 2028, which is the year we had intended to do the project in the first place. The reason that's important is we currently have programmed in our rate model and in our CFP to do that project in 2028. And in our just-in-time financing model, we don't have the money accrued until that time frame. So we didn't want to have to pay for the project any sooner than we would have if we had done it. And we have had this conversation with the developer, and they're fine with these conditions. Some of the other things that were considered or important is that the developer would manage the design and the construction of the process. They wanted to do that. We're fine with that. They're quicker at being able to do that. They have efficiencies that they can use to make that process go faster. The city, on the other hand, our contribution initially would be to basically provide plan inspection as well as plan review at no cost. Now, this isn't for the entire subdivision. This is just for that piece of sewer line in McDermott Road. The city would have to assign a project liaison, which would be one of my project managers or project engineers, to actually act as the city's connection on the project. And the agreement would have to include a non-appropriation clause. So this is, since the city is essentially not going to pay for the project in 2028, we would have to have a non-appropriation clause because that's a future council decision. And you guys, we can't commit to that until 2028. So the draft agreement that we currently have has a non-appropriation clause that basically says, developer, you agree and understand that there's a risk that the city council in 2028 may not fund our share of the project. And they're okay with that. They've done that with the city of Boise. They've done that in other types of agreements with other cities of this kind. And then just to reiterate, the Ustick Road piece of the project is not a part of this public-private agreement. That's the meat of it. Where we currently stand is we have reviewed the examples of various public-private agreements by other agencies. Toll Brothers attorneys drafted an agreement. We took a look at that, made a bunch of changes to it. And by we, I mean Public Works, purchasing, legal. We all reviewed the document, made a bunch of changes, sent it back to them. They looked it over with their attorneys, sent it back to us with virtually no changes. They were fine with it. That's essentially where it sits right now. What needs to happen to keep the agreement moving is it needs the financials. And we don't have those because this project hasn't been bid out. So what needs to happen now is on the 8th, Toll Brothers is going to present their project, Dayspring, to you guys. And if they can get the entitlements for that project, they will purchase the land. Once they've purchased the land, then they will move forward to bid the project out. They'll finish the design and bid this project out. Once the project is bid, we can then input the numbers from the bid, and we can bring that agreement back to you as city council to review and decide whether you want to support it or not. I did want us to, I assume one of the questions you might have is, okay, this is new. Where is this going to be eligible in other places? How many of these are we going to start to see? So to give you some information regarding that, currently the only projects that would be eligible in the city of Meridian would be the phases of the McDermott Trunk Sewer. This is one of them. There is one little short segment of sewer line, less than a quarter of a mile, of Eldon Gray Street, which is just on the south side of Kleiner Park. We plan to build that in 2029. I'm not sure any developer is going to jump at that opportunity to do a public-private partnership for that. And then we have contemplated that it's somewhere out in the 10-year CFP, out there at the very end of it, when the McDermott Trunk Sewer segments are completed, which is supposed to happen in 2032, we would start building the Victory Trunk Sewer. It'd be about 3 phases of the Victory Trunk Sewer. That would also potentially be eligible at some point in the future. So you can see currently there's only 2 possibilities in the city where it could even happen. And that's pretty much it. Just want to talk briefly, just reiterate the benefits in conclusion. It advances the timing of eligible projects, saves the cost for the city and the developer if we did it on our own. The timing of the city's expenditures match what's currently in the CFP and doesn't affect our rate model. The developer does have a risk of the non-appropriation clause, but if they're willing to do that, could be potentially a lot of benefits for the city in that it could cost us basically half of what it will cost if we did it on our own at a future date. And I guess with that, I will stand for any questions.
Councilman Cavan.
Mr. Mayor, thanks. Warren, I know I've got questions. I'm sure a few other members of council may have questions as well. What I'm going to ask though, Warren, we've got a public hearing that's going to start here in about 10 minutes. I'd like council to have an opportunity to have a quick bite to eat before we get to that public hearing. So if you're available, I'd like to continue this item to our main meeting and provide an opportunity for questions after the public hearing. Does your schedule accommodate for that? I hate to put you out at the dinner hour. I'm really sorry. I'm just trying to make sure that we're accommodating the public hearing. And I know some council members have some questions they want to get answered before we get to the 8th. Sure. No, I'm fine with that. Thank you. So, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if
Councilor
you need an
Cavan.
action or we'll just adopted the agenda that we'll add this item to item number 2 when we get to our main meeting agenda.
Okay.
Okay.
Then do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mayor, I move that we adjourn the work session.
Second.
Motion second to adjourn. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Council will call this meeting to order. For the record, it is June 24th, 2025 at 6:01 PM. We'll begin tonight's regular city council meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilwoman Little Roberts. Councilman Taylor.
Here.
Councilman Overton.
Here.
Councilman Whitlock.
Here.
Councilwoman Strader.
Here.
Mayor Simonson.
Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd all please rise and join us in the pledge.
To the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We didn't have anyone sign up for the community invocations, so we'll move on to adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
as we all know, we didn't quite get item 24 from our work session resolved by the end of our work session. So I'm going to move that to item number 2 following our public hearing this evening. With that, Mr. Mayor, I move we adopt the agenda as amended.
Second.
I have a motion second to adopt the agenda by moving item 2 to be a potential public-private partnership for sewer line installation. Is there discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted as amended. Madam Clerk, do you want to sign up under public forum?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have one person that signed up online, George Toma. I don't know if they are here. I don't see that name online.
Yeah, they are not there under that place online at this point in time. So with that, we will move on to tonight's action items. First item up is a public hearing regarding the potential ballot question concerning a levy to provide funding for firefighters, police officers, and a prosecution unit. We will begin tonight's conversation with a presentation that will be led by Mr. Neri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just have a brief presentation to kind of give some background for yourself and as for the public onto what this potential public safety levy that's being considered and being discussed tonight, what kind of how it works, how mechanically, how it functions. So again, in the Idaho Code, there is an opportunity for cities to request an increase to their existing levy. And that's what this conversation is about. The proposed levy would be used for 3 things. There are current positions in the fire department that are funded by a grant. This would help maintain those positions when that grant expires. Also, it was proposed to be used for police officer wages for both recruitment and retention for police, and then also to fund and begin a prosecution unit, in-house unit for the city to prosecute criminal offenses that are generated by our police department. If the city council does decide to go forward with that ballot measure, then the election would be held on the same date as the general city election, which is November 4th of this year. If it's on the ballot, the voters again will decide, and it does require a 60% approval rating to get approved. So currently under the Idaho Code, the city's existing levy, if it's less than a .004, the city may increase its budget if approved by the 60%, and the current levy is below that threshold, .004. And as you see the number here on the screen, it is .002 and another string of other numbers, but .002. Under the code, also then, certain codes are required, and that's kind of the purpose of both this process as well as the information that's been provided to date to the public. Purpose of the levy, date of the election, the amount to be collected from the levy, the estimated annual cost to the taxpayer per $100,000 of taxable value of their individual property, and the length of the time the levy would be in effect. So this potential levy that's being considered, based on that requested levy amount, would collect approximately $5 million and some change. That number is up on the screen, $5,018,125.71. The additional revenue will be used to provide funding for the police and the firefighters and the prosecution unit, as I've identified. And the estimated average annual cost of the taxpayer would be a tax burden of $20.11 per $100,000 of taxable value per year under their current conditions. And again, the conditions can vary based on homeowners exemptions and property values, and the property values change. So it's hard to get beyond that specific number, but that's what's required by code. Again, if approved, the levy would go into effect October 1 of 2026, beginning of the city's next fiscal year, and remain in place thereafter to serve as an ongoing funding source for those purposes as identified in the levy documents. And this is the potential ballot question that we would consider and be on the ballot for the public's consideration. Again, shall the city council of the city of Meridian be authorized and empowered to increase the city's budget and levy pursuant to Idaho Code section as identified by $5,018,125.71 to provide funding for the firefighters, police officers, and prosecution. So as we've identified, that would be the ballot question that we would propose to the voters if that is the decision to go forward. This would be the official statement. Again, the levy will be used to retain for those three identified sources or for those identified uses. The date of the election, as we've identified, is November 4th. The amount that's being requested, the fiscal year it would begin, and the increase or the estimated average annual cost per property taxable value. So again, everything as we've identified is required by law to be brought forward in this manner so that the public can consider all of things when they make that decision, if that's the decision of this council to move forward. Timeline, again, there's a couple of things on here that we've done to date. And right now we're at, as it's identified here and highlighted, first public hearing. So tonight was the first public hearing we identified to receive input from the community. We've also anticipated and scheduled a second opportunity on July 8th for, again, public input hearings. Anything, they can be submitted either in person or in writing. We will collect all of that data for the council's consideration. Again, on around the July 8th date, which is the next council meeting that's currently scheduled, the city council can decide to move forward with this ballot measure. On around August 12th, the city council will decide to proceed with an adoption of a resolution concerning the ballot measure. So basically the direction would be to go forward on July 8th or not. If it's to go forward, we'd bring back that resolution by the 12th. And then we'd have a deadline of August 29th to submit that ballot language to the county for consideration to be added onto the ballot for November 4th. And then, as I said previously, the election date is November 4th. So the Public Integrity Elections Act is just to make clear to the public. Again, if it decided to put this ballot or this question to the voters on the ballot, then the city will not be using any of its funds to promote that. We can educate and inform people so they know what is being asked of them, but the city cannot use its funds to promote that ballot measure, and that they can't use any mass communication preventing that levy must include the disclosures listed above. Again, the intention is to inform and educate. We can do that if it is a ballot measure. But any advocacy of this measure has to be done by other folks and other people that are for it or against it. They can do that. And we have some sources on the website, emails, and some other places that folks can reach the city online. And then obviously, as I said, both tonight and on July 8th, is an opportunity for the public to actually come before you and make their feelings known on this subject. And here's the forms that we have online that are available. Again, we have links on our website for people to look at. Again, it provides additional information and it outlines, again, the same process I've just discussed with folks. Again, there's all, again, available on our website, all of your council members, all the contact information so people can reach out to you if they wish. Provide this as part of the record so that, again, all of the council can consider that when they make this decision going forward. And then again, we have these links that folks can get to get more informed and more information about this levy. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Council, any questions for Mr. Neri at this time?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Maybe just a couple of quick questions. Some of the feedback there, the questions I've received from members of the public are largely around the concerns that it's kind of permanent. So can you walk the council through what steps the council could take at a future time to essentially undo the levy or to reduce the amount that we're asking as part of the levy?
Sure. So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Kavner, I'm going to probably lead to Mr. Lavoy on the future. So the levy changes as property values change. So the levy will change some anyway, but I think Mr. Lavoy can answer that better. But again, the council always, again, sets what the budget can be annually. So they do have that decision, but you have more to that, Todd.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Mayor, council, the question at hand is, can you undo or do the budget in future discussions? Every year, the legislative branch has every right to set the budget at their will. So if you wish to reduce, make a budget 50 million, 60 million, or whatever the value is, you have every right to, just like this year, you can reduce the budget to the amount of money that you wish the city to operate under. So it's your choice. There is no the state statute that says you have to do this or that. It's your discretion on how you wish to set the budget up. We just tell you what the maximum is. That is our job to keep you within the maximum values. But you can always reduce it any year.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cameron.
Mr. Lavoy, then if I'm understanding things right, future councils, when they set the budget, they will set their budget that is both, again, kind of looking at past years, our base budget requests. This is the amount of money that the city has in kind of property tax revenue. This is what the city could receive in terms of new construction, property tax increase, but then also the city would also see the amount that we could generate from the levy. And should the council want to reduce that amount as part of our annual budget, we can do that.
Mr. Mayor, council member, the display of information, again, that's something we can work on in the future. What we display to the citizens, it will be what is the total amount of revenue you wish to collect from the citizens for property taxes. How we display that, again, that is up to us. And if you wanted to show those different revenue sources, we have every right to do so. We will figure that out as we go if this levy goes through and if this levy passes. We haven't determined how our budget document would look for communication at this time.
Mr. Mayor, additional.
Councilman Cameron.
I guess what I'm getting at is that should this council want to reduce that amount over time, they can do that on an incremental basis. There's nothing that prevents them from saying, we're going to do nothing this year, but 10% next year, 50% the following year. We have the ability to reduce that amount should we want to.
Mr. Mayor, council member, the answer is yes. For any reason, levy or not, the legislative branch has every right to set the budget. Legal and finance provide you the maximum value you can request. You guys can reduce it to any value for any reason that the legislative branch sees every year.
Thank you.
Councilman Willock.
Bill, just a quick question on the 60% threshold. Is that tied to any request under 0.004%, or is it just simply asking for an additional levy has to meet that 60% threshold? And if it's ongoing or permanent? So my real question is, if we had this time bound to 5 years or 10 years or 20 years instead of permanent or ongoing, would we still be subject to that 60% threshold?
Yeah, I believe the 60% is set by statute, so that wouldn't change.
Yeah, if we were to do a different type of levy
Yes.
that was temporary for purposes defined by law, it could be a different number that could be up or down, similar to the foothills levy. But this is a permanent or an ongoing expense.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
I think it was last week I asked a little bit about, is this money earmarked specifically towards public safety? And we had a little bit of a conversation. I have had a couple of constituents in the interim who have asked me, how do we know that this money only goes to public safety, that there's not mission creep, that there's not other things brought into it? Maybe not this year, but years down the road. I'm anticipating part of the answer is it's up to the legislative branch. But can you add any more context or color to that question about how can they feel confident that this money is for public safety and always remains for public safety?
Mr. Mayor, council member, You are correct. The answer will be up to the legislative branch. I cannot guarantee any decisions of the future council members' decision on how they wish to spend their funds. So every year, it's going to be a question, how do you wish to spend the property taxes that we collect? So I cannot guarantee anything on a future council member's decision or council board's decision. Can we communicate via a budget document? Sure, we could. We can show that here's your revenue source, here's some property taxes from that levy rate. Are we making sure that these funds are going towards public safety? We might be able to put some documents together, but future council decisions, we cannot control that at this moment in time. There's no guarantee function at this moment.
Yeah, maybe to put another point on that, Councilmember Taylor, I mean, certainly this current council could direct a certain amount or a percentage or whatever type of earmark that they wanted to direct this budget would contain. Would that prevent a future council from changing it? No. Would that give some level of assurance to the public that that's at least the intention and target of this funds for this, and that's what it would be used for, and that it would at least take future council action to undo that and change it? Yes, that would be a way to do it, but could it guarantee it? No, it'd be no different than putting it in your code and requiring it in the Meridian code. You could do that, future council could change it.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Strader.
Yeah, that was going to be my question was, can we hold our own feet to the fire? Can we direct the finance department to, sort of track this under this council to separately track it? And, I know we don't usually earmark things, but could you?
Mr. Mayor, council member, the answer, we could track anything for you, but yeah, we can do a budget document, a form.
Right.
But like you stated, next council can ask me not to do that.
You could hold your feet to the fire. You can also move the fire.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Strader.
Sure, but as you know, councils don't take action behind closed doors. They need to do that in a public meeting. And we could certainly set up our own kind of approach to at least tracking it. I think that would be wise. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, do we have anybody sign up on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have Terry Dennington.
Okay, and if you come up, you'll be recognized for 3 minutes.
Yes, my name is Terry Dennington. I reside at 4581 West Big Creek Street in Meridian. Mayor Simonson and council members, I appreciate you having this hearing and public comments. There's already been some discussion a little bit from Representative or Councilman Kavanagh and Taylor and Whitlock, because my concern is I would really like to see some kind of sunset clause. I'm just not a big one for just kind of keeping things ongoing forever and perpetuity, because again, you guys all change over the years. We're all going to be gone and there's going to be other people in these places. So I believe a sunset clause is something that's important to look at or consider in the language that you're going to put out there. The other piece of that is, again, talking about how it's going to be used and how I like to know that if I'm going to be putting some kind of tax out there that I'm going to have to pay and put onto the public forever or for a period of time, that I know how it's going to be used. So I'd rather know that it's going to be public safety, it's going to be for the firefighters, it's going to be for the looking at the legal pieces, the police department, those kinds of things. I'd rather see something that was specific. So I don't know if that's, again, I don't know the legalities of that and putting it into the actual wording of the levy to know that it's going to be sunset in 5 or 10 or however many years, and then also specifically that it will be used for these, rather than leaving it up to you guys to have to decide how we're going to use these funds. So that's my input, and hopefully that all makes sense. Thank you.
Terry, I think there might be some questions. I know I've always got some questions, but council, any questions? I guess my question, Terry, for you is on the sunsetting. Knowing that this is going to officers' salary increases, are you suggesting that we cut their salaries with this? How do we either add the people additional firefighters long-term or pay our police officers more money with a sunset, that's essentially saying at a certain time frame, we're going to not pay them that money, or we're not going to have those positions if we add a sunset. And that's why this is a permanent, forever ongoing levy, is because it's the expectation that the police are going to be paid at that level. And it's the expectation that we're going to have all those firefighters. There's a little fungibility in this conversation about, reducing the amount. I mean, people can play games all they want in the future to try to justify that they lowered something down or did certain things. It's really about how much money it is the cost to provide the service when it's said. So how do you suggest that we, balance your thoughts on a sunset with our expectation that these are forever? These are costs that we are anticipating paying our officers or having these firefighters forever. What's your outcome on that?
Well, just kind of listening to the discussion of when I was hearing him, Mr. Lavoy talk about the fact that you guys are kind of, it's at your discretion right now, whether you're going to do a zero levy next year, or we're going to do it at the highest amount, or we're going to reduce it by 10. That's what it sounds like. It's already kind of discretionary as to how you will get those tax funds anyway. So I'm not sure how, again, it's almost kind of sunset if you said, we're not going to take that levy. We're going to do zero levy this year. We're going to do zero levy next year. So I'm not sure. Or if there's some way to take those funds and set them aside somehow, build a fund that sets aside some monies for future. I'm not sure how that looks, but again, it seems it's a little, it's not specific right now, so.
I think, the levy itself is very specific in what it's going to do. But I think what Mr. Lavoy was trying to point out is a future council could say, we don't want a police department anymore. We're just going to cut the entire department. That's what councils have the ability. We want to reduce our officers by 10 next year. We're going to reduce that down for whatever reason why. We've gone to robot drone dogs and they replace, we don't know what the future is going to hold. I think is kind of the point that you have is technology, individuals. I've had great conversations about Todd about changes in the accounting department with technology, and you may not have as many people doing the same work as you did last year, so you can reduce that down. So I think that's kind of a little bit of the chicken and egg in the context of you don't know what a future council is going to do. But I also don't want to put an expectation to our firefighters or police officers that this is a temporary increase in salary or a temporary that we're going to keep these positions, at least from this council's perspective. So that's why I'm trying to navigate that, expectation where some may want to reduce this off town. What it really means is you're not going to take as much of an increase in the future as you may have otherwise done, because you feel like the revenues have come in to accomplish that same goal for where you want your service level to be. And I get it, it's a difficult conversation for the community to grasp those type of conversations, but I'm trying to balance that, what you think you're hearing and saying with what the actual reality of what this is intended to do long-term. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and again, I think what you're saying there is again, somehow, if you're going to structure that with the accounting department of maybe setting aside in your budgeting, if you're going to take that levy and set aside so that maybe it will meet those future costs. Again, I don't know what that looks like exactly, but maybe that's a way to do it. Take those funds in, have a bucket that's going to sit there to keep paying those officers, firefighters, the different people, and make sure that those people are not going to be, left hanging or gotten rid of. But again, like you said, you could actually say, we want no police department, we're done, so shut it down, we're going elsewhere. Anyway, I just don't know what that looks like, but I'm just trying to think in terms of how we can do it without just putting a blanket out there for being the top dollars. And again, being very specific. I think it should be very specific that it needs to be for these specific things so that it doesn't get put into the general pot and then spent on other kinds of things. So that's my input. And yeah.
Mr. Mayor,
Any other questions?
Councilman Overton.
Terry, just as a councilman, as a lone councilman sitting up here, we don't take it lightly to put something forward like this, a levy that brings in $5 million if I saw that the revenue formulas 5, 7, 10 years down the road were changing significantly enough that we no longer needed that levy, then I don't think I'd want to see that levy existing just because we can. This whole reason for this levy coming forward is because we need it. Because we need to be able to keep those firefighters. We need to be able to pay those police officers what we can. We can't afford to keep losing them. We need to have our own prosecution staff, and we don't currently have that funding to do it. So if that gives you any sense of hope, if we ended up with changes in how the state funded municipalities and started to make up for that shortfall that we now suffer, I can very easily see us saying, we don't need this anymore, we want to walk away from it. But if that doesn't happen, I see this continuing into the future until something different does happen.
So Councilman Overton, the issue is that I trust all of you right now. But in the future, like I said, these faces are all changing, including mine. I'm not going to be here either because, you know, Lord willing, at some point in time, I'm going on. But I'm not sure where the other people that are coming up in the future and the people that are filling these positions will think like that. Will say, hey, we can just get rid of this levy now because we're in good shape and we got all the money we need. I just think in our human nature that lots of times people, if they've got money coming in, they don't say they want to stop it. They want to take it. And again, very specific, if it's for specific things and maybe looking to that, and that language says specifically that it will never go into just a pot of money that we can use however we want to use it. Those are my concerns. I believe that you guys all have all of this great intention and they're going to use it for what it needs to be used for, but future members may not be as honorable as you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Shader.
I get that fear. I guess what I would say, one thing I've noticed, just the city of Meridian has a long history of financial philosophy, or, we've not had any debt, for example. And I think there's a pretty good track record in this council and past councils of not taking up to the full 3% allowable property tax increase. And I feel like part of my thinking on it is that in years where we don't need it, we don't take it. And we're not trying to pad the revenue side, right? So we have a track record of many years where we didn't take the full 3%. And, now we're in a different place. And these pressures, I wish that they were around one-time money because it would totally solve the issue you're talking about. The biggest issue, I think, and part of why it's been so hard is that the pressure is really around our operating costs. That's where our hugest issue is. And so I think that's a big part of why it has to be a permanent levy increase in terms of accomplishing what we need, which is that we need a reliable source of ongoing revenue. That is the same characteristic of the 3% allowable property tax increase. That is also an ongoing source of revenue. So in future years, at least if you looked at our past history, I think you'd feel pretty confident that there will be years where if we don't need it, I hope we don't take it. That's been our history. That's what I would hope to see from future council members. And I do think that the city of Meridian has a pretty good track record of holding council members accountable on that. At least that's been my experience. So I know that doesn't totally solve your concern, but at least a little perspective just from what I've seen.
I appreciate that, Councilman Strader. Again, it's just that I know the people in the seat right now and those changed over the years.
Yeah.
And we just have different philosophies. People's philosophies change, their worldviews are different. And that changes as time goes on and the way people move forward in their beliefs and all that. And so I'm just concerned that we just need to be prudent in what we're doing. This is the people's money that we're taking.
Yeah.
And deciding how we're going to use it. And right now, I think it's great. I think we need the services that we have, and I want to support those. But I just want to try and figure out how we can be really diligent in how we're going to put that out to the public and say, this is not just money we can take forever for whatever we want, because in a way, that's kind of what I'm hearing, that once it's there and available, the money's, as Mr. Lavoie said, the money's yours to decide how you want to use it. It's there, it's up to you council members to make that decision. So that's my only concern, is that right now, I believe that all of our ideas and philosophies are in that place, and that's what we want to do and support, but I'm just not sure that the way it's worded right now is just leaving it as an open end is really the best way to do this. And again, legally, I don't know how that looks or how it gets set aside or set up, but that's my input, so.
Well, thank you, Terry, for not just being one of the few people that pays really close attention to our budget, for being here and providing comment. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, no one else has signed up.
Is there anybody present that would like to come forward? Come on up, sir. Good evening. Say your name for the record and be recognized for 3 minutes.
Brian Shackelford. I live on Sugar Maple Way in Meridian, Northwest Meridian. I just want to say that I support the idea of the levy. I think it's fiscally prudent for us as homeowners, for us as landowners as well, because we want to be able to attract and retain the best and the brightest for public safety and for those kind of things. And I think, yes, it's an increased cost for us as a homeowner, but at the same time, what happens when our public services decline, when our response times are lower, our quality of people we attract are lower? That's going to have an impact financially on us as well. So we have to be prudent. And to address a couple of concerns I've heard, number one, I guess, how do we ensure that this is used? Well, we as constituency make sure we, at the voting booth, you made the, Councilwoman, you made the point that we have a track record of holding the council responsible. And I think we do that with our vote and ensuring that we have the right people in your seats to ensure that we continue to use these funds that are earmarked for that purpose. Side thought, even if we put in the legislation or the levy that this is solely earmarked for public safety, and that may be the case, but that doesn't prevent a future council from saying, okay, well, they have this money earmarked, we're going to take some other budget monies away. So saying in the levy that this is solely for public safety, great, but that doesn't prevent a potential shortfall somewhere else. So I'm a big supporter of the idea. I just want good public services. I want good response times. And so I just want my voice to be heard to you guys that I think it's prudent, both fiscally and otherwise. And I was so shocked, quite frankly, that there's so few people here, that the apathy seems to be so great about our city, and whether yay or nay, there just seems to be such apathy. And I was a little surprised. I expected the room to be a lot fuller, but I appreciate your time and I thank you. And I would urge you guys to push the levy forward.
Thank you, Brian. Council, any questions? Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to provide comments on this item at this time? In council, there's, other than a city staff member and a KPVB representative, we don't have anybody online either that would, in theory, be ready to provide. Although Mr. White is a city staff or is a Meridian resident, so I guess I'll say if there's anybody online, please use the raise your hand function to provide comments. Okay. No one else at this point in time.
So, Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Kavner.
another public hearing scheduled for July the 8th. Certainly would encourage those of you that are in the room and our media partners that are here to help encourage people to come and share their perspective. I applaud. I think this council has tried to walk into tonight in this process with 2 ears. We want to hear from our community, and we hope that we hear from more of them on the 8th. And certainly recognize it's hard on a Tuesday night, particularly when the weather's so nice to come into City Hall. They can obviously reach out to us via email or the form, or to reach out to any of us individually. So Mr. Mayor, I think that concludes item 1, the public hearing. We'll keep it open for our July 8th hearing.
Okay, we will continue that. Maybe that's how we'll list it on the 8th, is continued from that standpoint for the conversation, even though there's no court quasi judicial process in that, but to keep the record together. So appreciate everyone that did come, whether it is to listen or comment on this item tonight. So with that, we'll move on to item 2, but was back to that, and we will pick up our conversation on the potential public-private partnership for sewer line installation. And Mr. Stewart had concluded his presentation and was here for council questions and comments.
Yep, Mayor, if you don't mind, council, before you start, I guess one of the things I didn't necessarily make clear is what we're looking for tonight. And really, it's just twofold. One's just to provide you with information regarding this type of potential agreement, so that if you hear about it in the future, it won't be a surprise to you. And 2, to get maybe some feedback as to whether we're spinning our wheels and wasting our time, or whether you want us to continue to have these conversations. And with that, I'll answer any of your questions.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Taylor.
Warren, thank you. I did have an opportunity to discuss this a little bit with Lorelei and get some more information. So maybe some feedback that's beneficial to you and to council. It feels very complicated in terms of getting it right with all the nuances of the contracts and agreements between the city and a private party, ensuring that legally it's sound. I know you guys have done a lot of work, and I anticipate that council may have a variety of very specific questions. And as you were presenting it, kind of ginned up some additional questions I may have about just ensuring that both parties are protected in a way that makes some sense. That said, I think as I view it from a bigger picture and sort of an idea and a concept, and if there's merit to it, I like this idea of a public-private partnership, because if I'm synthesizing your presentation in my own words in 30 seconds, here's an opportunity to have a private partner expedite some critical infrastructure. The net cost to the city will be half of what we projected because they will be paying for it. It's not expediting the calendar by which we're projecting to pay the funds, because we will only reimburse them in the time frame that we originally had planned in the out years. It's not putting anything in front of us that we're not planning to do, because if it's not within that 5-year window, we're not going to do it. So it has to be something we're looking at doing in the next few years. And the private sector is taking on all the risk initially and putting it up, and then counting on the city to keep its obligations to fund the reimbursement. To me, that we all know construction costs go up. I think there's some savings there. I think that makes, I like that idea of working with partners to kind of get that going. So there's a lot I like about this. I was wondering in my mind, is this a policy we would kind of implement, or is this a practice that we would sort of say we're open to these agreements? And it seems to me, with the very limited nature of where this is something we would do, it would be a practice the city would be willing to engage with the private sector. But again, it's going to save the city at least half the cost of the project. It's going to expedite it. It's going to open up some development. Just as long as we're ensuring we're following all the legal practices that are required to protect the city, I think it's worth exploring. That said, I can appreciate there's probably a lot of specific details about getting the agreements right, that, you know, we kind of leave it up to you and the professionals and staff to make sure we do it right. But I think that's just kind of some of my feedback, is I like this idea.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
Thank you, Warren. I have a ton of questions. Maybe starting with, do you have a map of the area in the city that this would open up for development? I think that would be the first thing I would need to see, because anytime we extend a sewer trunk shed, it's going to open up a huge part of the city for development. So I'd like to see that and kind of understand, I think, in a better geographic way, like, what am I looking at here? I guess that would be the first thing. Do you have that handy?
Mayor, Councilwoman, or Councilwoman Strader, I don't have one with me tonight. I could get that. I can generally describe the area, but that might not be
Mr. Mayor,
useful.
it's okay. I would really prefer to see it on a map. Like what area of the city will this specifically open up for development when it's complete? I think that's my first question. I'd like to understand as well, just, I think it would be helpful to see a map of all of the sewers that are planned. Again, I think I've seen it in the past. I'm sure I bugged Public Works about it in the past, but if I just want to understand, because it sounds like this has implications for other parts of the McDermott trunk. It has implications for this Eldon Gray area, this Victory area. I really want to see that. So that's something I'd like to also understand, because it feels to me like if we do it once, then these are the conditions under which we're open to doing it in the future. Do we get tied to this kind of an approach where maybe this is actually a legal question. If we do this in this instance, if another developer meets the same requirements, do we need to approve another public-private partnership? Mr. Mayor, I think that might be a question for Bill.
So, Mr. Members, the council, the short answer to that is no. I mean, there are always discretion. One thing we haven't discussed, and I don't recall, so Warren's been working with Mr. Starman from my team on this proposal. And one thing we hadn't talked about, Warren talked about a little bit on future potential partnerships that could occur. We hadn't discussed, at least I wasn't a part of it, if we wanted to put this in ordinance. We've had other situations in the past where we looked at a particular type of project. To answer that very question, Councilmember Strader, that you just asked, was we decided that it would be something we would consider, and we wrote it into an ordinance to allow us to do that. Again, creating whatever those rubric is, whatever those requirements that we wanted to put on there to do that. But we hadn't discussed that. This was really, at this juncture, is just a one-off that's being requested. But I think as Warren identified, there are potential, I think you identified 3, that could fit into this similar circumstance. But if the answer is, are we required to do it in the future? The answer is no. We don't ever have to do it. There obviously is risk, and I think that's what Warren is trying to identify, is that because of the risk of potentially not being funded in a future year, that's a great risk on the developer part to want to forward that. This particular circumstance, they're willing to do that, knowing that is a risk. But I don't foresee that being something that's going to come up as often.
Mayor, Councilwoman Strader, Bill's correct. We hadn't contemplated this being some sort of a broader sort of ordinance or anything like that. These public-private partnerships may not, just because there's an area that might potentially be available for one, so to speak, doesn't mean there's going to be one happen. And 2, you have 2 points that have to happen. First of all, you have to approve a budget to do the work. Secondly, you'd have to approve the agreement. So in the future, if we get directed to continue to have these conversations or with this particular developer, you're still going to get a look at an agreement, all the terms and conditions in that agreement, and whether or not you want to support it or not in the future here in the next few months. So there's a couple of, I guess, off-ramps, if you will. And as far as the McDermott trunk project, we have plans to build that trunk in absence of any development. We have currently in the CFP to build the various phases of that up through 2032, when that part will be complete. Those are all dependent upon you funding those projects. So that's not for sure, but that's certainly our plan at this point, is for that McDermott trunk sewer line to be extended to a point where we can then essentially allow development to take it and extend it from there. We know that there's a lot of interest in certain parts of that extension, not necessarily all of it, but certain parts of that extension. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it was not our intent to make this something that is an automatic. You get this. It's just something that we could entertain if the conditions in the situation were something that the council wanted to support. But it does have the potential to save the city pretty significant amount of money.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Strader.
to that point, what is the total estimated cost of this project?
The developer looked at this in 2022. He bid it out in 2022. It was just shy of $5 million at the time. Current estimates, not bids, but current estimates are double that. So we're talking about nearly a $10 million project.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Strader.
Um, okay, I guess maybe some feedback for me right now. I feel like this could be a little problematic because we don't have a ton of time between now and when this, I guess, application is coming. So I think that the types of information that I need to just assess this idea would be the map that I referenced. I think I would need to see a copy of the draft agreement, at least an idea of the legal document, what the provisions would be to review. I think I want to understand if this is a priority growth area for us and why. And I think that would be helpful to understand from planning staff's perspective and the mayor's perspective. And then I think, yeah, I'm just gonna have to dig into it a bit more. The memo I thought was a bit light, which is okay. They usually are, but it's a lot of information kind of coming at us in this one meeting. So I think I'd have to understand that. Another question I had was around counterparty risk. So if we start this project based on the geology of this area, the fact that you've got to go 30 feet underground, et cetera, usually, I mean, like, for example, Toll Brothers, I don't know if it's Bruce Toll, if it's the publicly traded company, like who we're dealing with, but I think it would be helpful to understand from our perspective what risks we might have if our counterparty, let's just take them out of the picture specifically, but any counterparty in this type of a partnership were to fail. What if they go bankrupt? What if they decide to walk away from the project because things change? Things change all the time. Interest rate environment can change. We could see really dramatic changes. And I asked a lot of these same questions about a different developer on a different project not far from here and haven't been happy with how that's played out, despite their assurances. So I think I'd need to really understand, like, with this type of infrastructure, if you were mid-project and it were to fail, is the city going to have to step into the shoes of the developer to complete the project? I understand financially we might come out okay on what we would have paid anyway, but is there anything with the infrastructure specifically and the nature of this type of project that once you start it, you must complete it? I just want to kind of go through like a failure scenario, worst case scenario, how does this play out? So I don't expect you to answer that here unless you thought about that. I'd love to hear, but that's something I'd really want to dig into.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Strader, we can talk about a couple of those things. I think one of the questions I have, you are correct. The memo was a little light, and that was intentional. I was trying to be really careful because I wanted to give you a heads up about something that we were contemplating, because I thought you were going to hear about it potentially in a future city council meeting. But I didn't want to talk in detail about that because that's for that council meeting. And the agreement wouldn't come until after you had made a decision on whether or not this development was something you were even interested in approving. So I didn't want to give too much information because I had to be careful. There's a line there. I think you understand that I can't discuss too much. That's also one of the reasons I guess I'll ask Bill. I don't know whether it's okay at this stage of the game for me to give a draft agreement to the city council, or if that has to wait till after that hearing.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think it probably should have waited at least until the hearing. Again, I think, and I'm sure Councilmember Strader gets this. I guess it's more for the record, but the decision on the land use application can be independent of this. right? And it should be. I mean, the decision on whether to annex and grow and add this property and all of that is separate and apart from this. Now, again, I think Warren's correct. It's naturally likely to be a conversation topic because of serviceability. That's always a question that's going to come up in a land use application. And so I think it will likely come up as a conversation point. But I think once you hear that, and if that's a desire of this council to say, we're interested in the application, we're interested in this concept, but we want to see the agreement, then that would probably be the better time to see that.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Schrader.
okay, maybe a different way of going about this is I will just state on the record that generally for me to ever be comfortable with any type of project or arrangement like this on any land use item at all, I would need to see the agreement. So I would highly recommend that the applicant provide that as part of their application if they want to be as persuasive as they can be with me. I guess I'll put it that way. It's funny, I get it. But like in terms of how the sausage is actually made, the chances of a project being approved for annexation without critical infrastructure is very low, right? So we're all here in reality together. I mean, I'm just being practical. Okay, well, I think I've said what I would need, so whatever you do have, please provide. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Strader, I guess you asked another question about a worst-case scenario. There are provisions in the agreement, I can at least say that much, that, what if somebody fails? What happens if somebody fails? So some of those things are, those types of provisions are in the agreement. And yeah, like I say, I'm not here to try and promote this one way or the other, or to promote the development one way or the other. That's your guys' decision. I just wanted to make sure that when you hear about this on April 8th, you're like, what in the world is our, staff been doing? I wanted to make sure you were aware that we were engaging with folks on this type of conversation and get your feedback as to whether or not you were interested.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
Yeah, I mean, some of the follow-up questions that come to mind on that point are, how are you mitigating that risk? Are you using bonding? Are you using, some other type of insurance? Or, that's maybe start there.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Strader, yes, they would have to provide the same types of assurances that, say, a developer would if he was doing a project anywhere in the city of Meridian. They would have to bond for it.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
Yep, I will commit to providing follow-up questions to you after this meeting because I will have more. Thank you.
And just going through the map that I've seen, I believe it's essentially not including what additional may be done. It's U-stick north, taking in most of the property that's already been annexed for Hawaii High School through that area that brings it into that serviceable area, as well as going back into the other parts of the city which are not yet annexed, that are kind of infill on the other side towards the city, is what I want to say is on the map. I don't know how far west it goes, how far beyond the old Hawaii High School property that it serves, but I don't think it's very far. So it's really taking in stuff that's already annexed, or it could be annexed on infill if this project was completed, is what my memory is, but you'll see the map.
Mr. Mayor, I think that was part of, I guess, maybe a little bit of a question. Are we talking about the area that can be served by this little piece that we're talking about building, this half-a-mile section, or the overall McDermott trunk concept? And I can break that up into phases if that would be beneficial. So I guess maybe do some clarification on exactly what you're looking for.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
Yeah, it's both. So, I mean, I think it's important to understand the map of all of our planned sewer trunks and, bless you, and what the timing is expected to be over time, right? Just on our side, I think I'd like to understand that. But then the other piece of this is, you're correct. What specific areas would the construction of this segment, including any other parts that are along the way, right? What parts of the city does that open up for development? That's the question. And I think you can you know, the difference to me would be, okay, private dollars can now connect. I realize everyone has to build a little bit, right? So you're going to have to think about that, how to show that. But I think what I'm interested in is our money will pay for, our tax money, our residents' tax money would pay for this segment. We think that opens up these other segments where developers will pay their share in for a little connection to it. But just practically, what does it open up? Because I'm guessing it's a large area. But I don't know.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Strader, for this half-mile section, you'd be surprised. It's not that, the direct connections that can come from this are not that significant. It's just basically projects or parcels of land that are on either side of it. Now, you're correct. If a developer puts in another, quarter-mile sewer line to the east, it's mostly to the east. There's not much that's served to the west. But if he puts in another quarter mile, or as in this case, the developer we're talking about for this Dayspring project is anticipating building a half a mile. I think it is. Yeah, about a half a mile down Ustick. And that would open up all those parcels along Ustick. But they wouldn't be open to development without that contribution, which is going to be entirely upon them.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Scher.
Yep, and I think that's to my point of why I need that. And part of it is critical infrastructure is a big investment. We need to be thoughtful about it. I just want to make sure that we're not spreading ourselves too thin. Right now, development is much slower than it used to be. But prioritizing where we want to grow has been very important. And I think a lot of our challenges have come from building in a lot of places at the same time. So I just really want to get a sense of geographically what we're talking about. But I think you've heard me and I appreciate you. Thank you. And I know you're conveying the information. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, by the way. I just, like, with anything like this, I'm going to need to dig in. So thanks.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Willock.
I appreciate Councilwoman Strader's concern about liability with failure and appreciate the answers, Warren, about bonds and other protections that are in place. Mr. Neri, just a question on the flip side of that coin. Why would a partner in an agreement like this agree to a non-appropriation clause on our side of the coin?
Two reasons. One, we can't do it without it, so we wouldn't even entertain an agreement without a non-appropriation clause. And I guess the other is there's for lack of a better way of saying it, I think there's a trust and a belief that we've intended to fund a project and we likely will. Now, they recognize the risk, as Warren has identified, that things change, economies change, circumstances change, and things change, and they recognize that and obviously factored that decision point in. But if we are intending to do something, we are likely to do it. So even as we've discussed it, and I don't know if Warren has had the same conversation with Mr. Starman, but what I've seen historically, right, is cities have a tendency to move projects, not completely delete them. So the potential could be that they'd move it a year or two. Obviously, they factored that in as well. But that's my belief, is that most likely if we're planning a project and we have it in our CFP, I think they must believe we're likely to do it at some point, and they're willing to take that risk. But on the first part, without a non-appropriation clause, it's a non-starter. We can't do it.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Scher.
That prompts a further question for me. Is there any reason that do they have an expectation, to your knowledge, that we would have a development agreement that would obligate the city? Because it may not be part of this agreement, but I'm wondering if that would be part of a development agreement and if the city could be sued under that.
No, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Strader, no, that's been the ongoing part of the discussion, that even if we were to incorporate this as part of a development agreement, there's still going to be the same safeguards for the city. Our only concern is the city is not going to be on the hook to build something that is not intended when it wasn't intended at a funding level that was not appropriated. So there is no intention on our part to put anything in there that obligate the city. that if they were to like you asked earlier and Warren said, that we want assurances on the development side that this can get done without the city's contribution, even if they were to walk away.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Little Roberts.
Mr. Mayor Warren, thank you so much for all of this. Do I remember correctly that design is in the potential partners bucket? And if so, how much oversight do we have on them designing something that's going to be becoming part of our permanent system?
Mr. Mayor. Councilwoman Little Roberts. They are actually designing this project currently on their own dime. Because they had contemplated the possibility of doing it on their own. I don't think they have basically said, we looked at the numbers, they don't pencil, but they are in the process of designing it. But just like any developer project, when the designs are done, they go through our process. So they will be submitted to development services. They will go through they will go through that process. Engineering will have an opportunity to look at them. So we'll do the same type of review on their design that we would do if it was a developer on another project looking to do this work. So we would make sure that we got what we wanted.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Warren, you're a subject matter expert when it comes to a lot of this, so I appreciate kind of you bringing this to our attention. Councilmember Strader, I don't like the speed at which we're going to kind of have to come to a conclusion on this type of a request. And when you were kind of laying things out, you indicated, hey, we never heard of this before. This wasn't something that was necessarily on your radar either. Let me understand from your perspective as a subject matter expert, what are the risks or what are the concerns you see that cause you some trepidation about going down this particular path?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cavanagh. You know, there are obviously some risks associated with performance, and that's why we would require performance and payment bonds and other things in case they went, upside down somehow on the project before they were completed. Outside of that, we've talked about that. If we have all the terms and conditions in there up front that we need, that we are assured that they're bidding the project out according to public bidding process so that we don't have any issues there. And we don't have to actually come forward with the money any earlier than we would have. There's obviously a risk if they were saying, we want the money now, because that messes with our rate model, that messes with our existing funding. And that's not something we want to do, but that's not the case. They're willing to wait for their money. And it has the potential to reduce the city's cost by 50%. So outside of the, failure to perform on the contract, which we mitigate that the same way we would on any project, I don't know that there are a lot of other significant risks to the city. Potential benefits, yes, but I'm not here lobbying for those. That's up to you to decide one way or the other, whether you like that or not.
Mr. Mayor, follow up if I may.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Warren, taking maybe the July 8th hearing off the table, is this a tactic that you and your team, if this is something council is supportive of, is it a tactic that you and your team would continue to go out and solicit on your own? Would it be your intention to wait for the development community to come to the city to seek these additional public-private partnerships?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cavanagh, we have no intentions of soliciting anybody. This is something that we would anticipate if a developer were interested, they could come to us and we would have a conversation. But it is not our intent or desire to go out and solicit this type of an agreement. I don't think that's our place.
Thank you, Warren. I appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, sorry, but just one more.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Warren, apologies. Have you and your team discussed a rubric or a decision tree that would determine in the future if these types of public-private partnerships make sense? And I guess I'm looking at, if this is a path we go down, we'd want to apply the same standards consistently. Is that something that you and the department have discussed?
So, Mayor, Councilman Cavanagh, there was a slide that I showed there that had all the kind of terms and conditions. That was sort of our litmus test. It's like, okay, it would have to be this, you know, it has to be in our 5-year CFP. It has to be a 50-50 split. It has to be, the city doesn't, you know, have to come up with any money. Those are the conditions that we sort of came up with. And as I also indicated, there's really a very limited number of these in the city. As of right now, today, there's the McDermott trunk and the Eldon Gray. That's it. There's not another place in the city where this would apply under the current set of, you know, rules or conditions that we have set for this one. So there's not a lot of opportunity for one, because we don't engage in construction of infrastructure on the city side, only in rare cases where it's just not something that we can expect development to do.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're not under any time frame to approve any of this in 2 weeks from now. This was more of give us a heads up so we understand. I do think, though, that it's fair to assume that the developer will think that we're fully up to speed and we've made some decisions. So I think all of these questions are really fantastic. I think this has been very helpful and thought-provoking. It is a big step, I think, for the city to engage in this way. I'm open to it as long as it's done the right way. But I think I want to clarify, I don't think we as a council have to make any decisions on whether we are okay with this by the time they come forward with their application. But of course, obviously, you know, the applicant may have some assumptions about our knowledge. So I appreciate you bringing this to us now. I also agree with Councilwoman Strader's comments about when you look at the map and you look at the trunk line, it's actually very helpful to understand that, because with the McDermott trunk line, we're looking at, you know, going out over a decade of how that's going to extend. And so understanding where on the map that we're talking about, we're not talking about a section of, you know, the proposed trunk line that's disconnected from anything. It's an extension of kind of currently where it is very helpful. So I do think it would be helpful if you could provide that to everyone to help us understand kind of the city's plan, because it isn't a part of town where that McDermott trunk line will open up, you know, one of the largest really undeveloped parts of the city. So I do think it's a significant conversation, though it is extended out over a significant horizon. But I think that would be helpful to have that sort of either emailed to us with sort of a kind of a where the current trunk lines are now, and then each calendar year or fiscal year, what the plan is. But I would comment here, you know, we're looking at savings of, you know, $4 to $5 million potentially on this project to the city. That's money not spent by the city, which is not to be ignored. So I do think it's a worthwhile exercise to look at this as a smart way for us to work with the development community. I do agree with the idea of making sure that the growth is how we want it to be, because we found ourselves with some applications where the infrastructure seemed very, very lacking, and it made it really hard for us to say, okay, because we just found it was creating additional problems. So that's a very smart conversation piece to have. But anyway, I do appreciate that.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Taylor, I guess I got two questions real short out of that. One was, what is the developer's expectation? We have made it clear to the developer that the city council won't make a decision on this until after the project bids out and we have financial numbers to actually put into the agreement. So they know that the agreement cannot be finalized until it's bid. They know they're not going to bid it out until they have entitlements. But my guess is on the 8th, you're going to hear them say, we're going to do a big project to bring sewer, and we want to do a public-private agreement in order to make that happen. We just wanted to get ahead of that a little bit to give you a heads up that you're going to hear that, and didn't want that to be the first time. We wanted you to hear that coming from the staff. And then two, happy to provide the map. In fact, I think we already have one that we've put together that shows the segments and the years in which those segments would be constructed.
Council, additional questions or comments? Lauren, Leroy, thank you very much. We've been talking about this concept for a while. I appreciate now actually seeing it in its, all the components that you put into it. You know, I think it actually solves other issues for us up in this area as well if this project moves forward. So I'm hopeful it does, but getting the council's questions answered, hopefully we'll provide that opportunity irregardless of the situation regarding the annexation. So appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we will move on to our ordinance for this evening. First up is item 3, which is ordinance number 25-2088. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ordinance 25-2088, an ordinance Mont Meadow subdivision H-2024-0067, annexing a parcel of land between a portion of the southeast quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 31, Township 3, North Range 1, East, Boise, Meridian, Idaho, more particularly described in Exhibit A, rezoning 10.84 acres of such real property from RUT, rural urban transition, to R2, 8.48 acres, low density residential, and R4, 2.36 acres, medium low density residential zoning districts, directing city staff to alter all applicable use and area maps, as well as the official zoning maps and all official maps depicting the boundaries and the zoning districts of the city of Meridian in accordance with this ordinance, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, repealing conflicting ordinances and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody that like it heard read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
move that we approve ordinance number 25-2088.
Have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 25-2088. Is there any discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh, Little Roberts, Taylor,
Aye.
Overton, Strader,
Aye.
Whitlock.
All ayes, motion carries. The item is agreed to. Next item up is item 4, which is ordinance number 25-2089. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. An ordinance Sky Ranch H-2024-0022 for rezone of a parcel of land between a portion of Government Lot 4 of Section 31, Township 3 North, Range 1 East, Boise, Meridian, Ada County, Idaho, more particularly described in Exhibit A, rezoning 24.53 acres of land from the R4 medium-low density residential zoning districts to the R15 medium-high density residential zoning district in the Meridian City Code, directing city staff to alter all applicable use and area maps, as well as the official zoning maps and all applicable official maps depicting the boundaries and the zoning districts of the city of Meridian in accordance with this ordinance, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Treasurer, and the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody that will like it read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
I move that we approve ordinance number 25-2089.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 25-2089. Is there discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh.
Aye.
Little Roberts.
Aye.
Taylor.
Aye.
Overton. Strader.
Aye.
Whitlock.
All ayes, motion carries. The item is agreed to. Next item up is item 5, which is ordinance number 25-2090. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. An ordinance Sky Ranch H-2024-0022, annexing a parcel of land located in the south half of the southeast quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 31, Township 3 North, Range 1 East, Boise, Meridian, Ada County, Idaho, more particularly described in Exhibit A, rezoning 20.039 acres of such real property from RUT, rural urban transition, to the R15 medium high density residential zoning district, directing city staff to alter all applicable use and area maps, as well as the official zoning maps and all official maps depicting the boundaries and the zoning districts of the city of Meridian in accordance with this ordinance, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, repealing conflicting ordinances and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody like to read it in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
I move that we approve ordinance number 25-2090.
I have a motion second to approve ordinance number 25-2090. Is there a discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh,
Aye.
Little Roberts,
Aye.
Taylor,
Aye.
Overton, Strader,
Aye.
Whitlock.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carries, and item agreed to. Next item is item 6, which is ordinance number 25-2091. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. An ordinance, Full Desi Reserve H-2024-0055, annexing a parcel of land located in the north half of the southeast quarter of Section 34, Township 4 North, Range 1 West, Boise, Meridian, City of Meridian, Ada County, Idaho. More particularly described in Exhibit A, rezoning 3.31 acres of such real property from RUT, Rural Urban Transition, to the IL Light Industrial Zoning District, directing city staff to alter all applicable use and area maps as well as official zoning maps and all official maps depicting the boundaries and the zoning districts of the city of Meridian in accordance with this ordinance, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, repealing conflicting ordinances and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, we've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody that would like to read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
I move that we approve ordinance number 25-2091.
I have a motion, a second, to approve ordinance number 25-2091. Is there any discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh, Little Roberts, Taylor,
Aye.
Overton, Strader,
Aye.
Whitlock.
All ayes, motion carries, and item is agreed to. Council, anything under future meeting topics or a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Caver.
No, future meeting topics, but just a couple of quick announcements. I know a couple of us chatted yesterday about helping or attending the pancake feed for our parks volunteers tomorrow. I thought Dave was gonna send something out, but I did not see it today. But if you are planning to attend, it's at shelter B1, which is across from the Meridian Senior Center. And no one's expected. You don't have a role, but if you want to attend, everyone is invited. And I'm sure you all saw the email from our clerk, Mr. Johnson. No meeting next week, so enjoy the Tuesday night off. We'll return on July 8th with what I understand is a fairly full agenda. But I wish you all a happy Independence Day. And Mr. Mayor, with that, I move we adjourn our city council meeting.
Second.
Motion second, adjourn the meeting. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. And the email came from Joshua. So you.
Oh, I missed it. Okay.